All right, so let's go ahead and share the text while it's doing its thing. YouTube feed and set that to one side so I can keep an eye on it as well. There. All right. Everything is in place. Let's get the Brady Bunch picture over here so that I can keep track of everyone. And 12:01. Just give it a few seconds for those that are getting the announcement on YouTube that the stream went live so that they can join. And we'll let them pile in. All right. All right, let's go ahead and get down to work. So as promised, we have concluded our singular focus in the Talmud. We are going to come back into the Talmud for some of our other study going forward, but not today. Today, we are going to look at the most condensed synthesis in an earliest strata of Jewish scholarship for all of these ideas. And this is taken from Rambam's Mishnah Torah. Mishnah Torah was Rambam's compilation of Jewish law, but he also included, in addition to the so-called practical laws, many of the other points of important either personal behavior or personal belief. Belief was something very, very important to Rambam, also known as Maimonides, which he goes into much more detail in his Guide for the Perplexed and some of his other writings. And we will be touching base with one of his other writings, slightly less well known than either of these, when we get to one of our other false messiahs. But here in his Mishnah Torah, he devotes 2 chapters to the concept of the end of days. Now, much of this had been heavily censored and edited and deleted by the Catholic Church in the European areas. That was because the Catholic Church did not like the fact that we did not acknowledge Jesus as Messiah. I mean, go figure. We're not Christian, so of course we don't, but apparently they didn't like us saying it out loud. So unfortunately, for many centuries, certain portions of these chapters were not available to European scholars, but thankfully our Sephardic and Mizrahi brothers and sisters had copies that had not been edited, and we were able to put it back together again in its original completeness. So we're going to run through this. Well, run is not the right word. We're going to walk through this, and I'll explain not just what he is saying as a summary, but why he felt the need to say it or say it in this way, highlight some of the decisions he's making. As we saw from our Talmudic discussion, there is a lot of debate, and Rambam is coming down on certain opinions as being what he believes to be the correct. That doesn't make the other ones wrong. It just means that one of our great sages about 1,000 years ago felt that these ideas were the most compelling from our understanding of the texts that we had received. All right, so like I said, it'll be a little clearer once we get going. So let's go ahead and get going. In the future, the Messianic king will arise and renew the Davidic dynasty, restoring it to its initial sovereignty. He will build the temple and gather the dispersed of Israel. Then, in his days, the observance of all the statutes will return to their previous state. We will offer sacrifices, observe the sabbatical and jubilee years according to all their particulars, as described by the Torah. All right, so this is his short summary. Now, he's going to go into more detail on some of these points, but let's just go through the summary itself. So first of all, he is already putting together a little bit of a timeline, that there will be the Messiah first, then that will lead to a renewed Davidic dynasty, and that will cause then a restoration of Jewish sovereignty. Now, this is not 100% everyone agrees kind of topic. Some people believe that there will be a restoration of sovereignty that will then lead to a restoration of the dynasty, which will then allow the Messiah to be revealed. Of course, this is a controversial topic. Indeed, for many people that are of modern religious Zionist persuasion, That is to say, people who believe that the modern state of Israel, founded in 1948, is an expression of this messianic process. They believe that the state comes first, that sovereignty comes first, rather than the other way around. So that is a counter argument to what Rambam is saying, one that we will look into more detail when we look at Zionism versus Messianism much, much further down the road. We've got a lot of other discussion of other historical segments before we get to that. Part two, he will build the temple and gather the dispersed of Israel. Now, those are two separate ideas. The first, of course, being the establishment of the temple is attested to in many of the prophetic works. And that, of course, seems pretty non-controversial, although the how exactly it gets built is definitely open to much debate and discussion. And at what point and under what circumstances it gets built, also very debated. And gather the dispersed of Israel. Likewise, there is still debate of whether the gather the dispersed means make it possible for Jews to return, or whether gather the dispersed means force all the Jews to disperse or to return, or rather create the conditions such that every single Jew will feel pulled to return. It's important to note that during the restoration after the Babylonian conquest, when the Persian Empire allowed us to return to our home, many Jews did not. And indeed, from that point on, there was almost always a majority of Jews living outside the land of Israel. So many would argue that the ingathering of the exiles is a potential opportunity that it would be possible for us to return, that we would be returning to a sovereign nation, but that it is not mandatory to return. Indeed, Rambam himself does not list living in Israel as one of his mitzvot when he enumerates the different mitzvot. He did try it for a while and then left because he did not find it a reasonable place to live during his generation. Onward. Then in his days, meaning during the reign of the Mashiach, the observance of all the statutes will return to the previous state. So this is the idea that we will become righteous and observant in all of the proper ways. There is still some ambiguity about certain mitzvot that will be reconciled, and of course, everyone will turn to the observance of the mitzvot with a full heart. Now, this again is answering one of those questions in a particular way, which is not universal, but it is answering a question of, do we have to be perfect before the Mashiach comes? And here we see Rambam arguing, no, we do not. That in fact, Mashiach will arrive, and that will help our progress towards perfection, such as is possible within the earthly state. It is not a precondition for his arrival or for what we would call redemption. And then the institution of sacrifices, the sabbatical and jubilee years. This is also something that is debated and discussed, and we'll come back to that at another time. All right. Now, sorry, my mouse is rolling a little further. There we go. Anyone who does not believe in him, meaning Mashiach, or does not await his coming, having hope, denies not only the statement of the other prophets, but those of the Torah and Moses, our teacher. The Torah testifies to his, again, Mashiach's coming, as Deuteronomy 30, verse 3 to 5 states, God will bring back your captivity and have mercy upon you. He will again gather you from among the nations. Even if your diaspora is at the ends of the heavens, God will gather you up from there and bring you to the land. These explicit words of the Torah include all the statements made by all the prophets. Okay, very important theological concept that Rambam is indicating here. It might feel like a hint, but he's being pretty straightforward. And it's going to be an important concept for the rest of this summary. So let me just go ahead and get this explanation out of the way. Rambam, based upon the teachings of the earlier sages from Mishnah, Talmud, and Midrash, understood that whatever any later prophet saw, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, any of those guys, whatever they saw, whatever they knew, was already understood by Moses. Now, Moses may not have said exactly the same words they said, But that doesn't mean Moses was unaware of the truth that the later prophets' teachings would reflect, because Torah, in the broadest sense of the word, not just the 5 books, but as an understanding of God's will, is universal and unchanging. So therefore, how could they have an idea that had not already been revealed to Moses? Indeed, it would be, well, basically heretical to imagine that there was an update later on. Judaism, as I think many of you know, doesn't go in for sequels. We had our Bible, and that was it. We're not waiting for a new one to come along. In fact, Deuteronomy itself tells us not to expect someone to go across the sea or up to heaven to bring back what God wants. We've already been given it. Now, why is that important here? Well, because the Torah itself does not speak very, and that's an italicized word here in my speech, very explicitly about Mashiach. We're going to see references in just a minute, but they are allusions more than the same straightforward statements that are found in the words of the prophets. So what Rambam is trying to do here in his summary is what we did in the Talmud in much, much lengthier study, which is bring the ideas that are found in the prophets back to their roots within Torah phrases as well, so that we would understand this was not a novel idea introduced by later prophets, but indeed has been part of the entire vision of God and the Jewish people since the very beginning. And this is in Deuteronomy 30. He is trying to say, basically, this section is a summary that you could look at as giving us all of the other statements of the prophets if you extrapolate correctly. Now, in addition to the diaspora, he also wants to talk about Mashiach more directly as being rooted in the Torah itself. So let's go ahead and look at those sections. Reference to the Mashiach is also made in the portion of Bilam, who prophesies about 2 anointed kings. The first anointed king, David, who saved Israel from her oppressors, and the final anointed king who will arise from his descendants and save Israel in the end of days. That passage, Numbers 24, 17 to 18, relates, and we will have italics followed by Rambam's explanation, which is based off the rabbinic tradition that is in the Talmud and other sources. I see it, but not now. Bilam there is talking about David. I perceive it, but not in the near future. This refers to the Messianic king. A star shall go forth from Jacob. That line is referring to David. And a staff shall arise in Israel. This refers to the Messianic king. And crushing all of Moab's princes. This refers to David, as the 2 Samuel 8:2 relates. He smote Moab and measured with them with a line. And decimating all of Seth's descendants. This refers to the Messianic king, about whom Zechariah prophesies, he will rule from sea to sea. So we can see that we've got this parallelism from the poetry of Bilam that is being understood by rabbinic commentary to refer to 2 different characters, because you have parallel tracks. You have the David track and the Mashiach track. So rather than just saying, I see it, but not now, I perceive it, but not in the near future, is a poetic coupling of the same idea said 2 different ways. It is the same idea, but expressed in 2 different people. And that's what Rambam is trying to lay out here. Let's continue this section. Edom will be demolished. This refers to David, as 2 Samuel states. Edom will became the servants of David, and Seir will be destroyed. This refers to the Messianic king of Obadiah. As Obadiah prophesies, saviors will ascend Mount Zion to judge the mountain of Esau. A line that you might know better in its Hebrew because it's part of our morning prayers. All right, and then finally, similarly with regards to the cities of refuge, this is now in Deuteronomy 19, it states, when God will expand your border, you must add 3 more cities. Well, this command, mentioned in Deuteronomy, was never fulfilled. Surely, God would not give this command in vain. So the final proof text there is a logical analysis of the text in light of history. Since God said that we would add 3 more cities, and since we never reached the point where we did add 3 cities during the time of prior Jewish sovereignty, that must be a prophecy for the future, which means there will be a time with renewed sovereignty, something that was really not in the cards until the 20th century. And so people were absolutely looking at this long term, and that in that time there would be an establishment of these additional cities for refuge. Now, he's going to finish off with one more important point here, then let me explain. There is no need to cite proofs from the works of the prophets, for all their books are filled with mention of this matter. Rambam finishes off by saying, look, I'm not going to bring for you a source sheet about the end of days from the prophetic works, because that's like 80% of what they're talking about. Not quite, especially depending upon how you count certain things as prophetic or non-prophetic, but it is heavily represented throughout the prophetic literature, as we have seen many examples, some of which we looked at discreetly in some of our earliest classes on this topic, and some of which we saw referenced in the Talmud as well. So it would be redundant to simply say, here's an example from Ezekiel, here's an example from Isaiah, here's an example from Jeremiah. Nobody disputes that the later prophets talk about these issues. What was disputed, and this is what if you'll notice if you read between the lines, is whether the Torah mentioned these concepts. And Rambam is arguing, in keeping with Jewish tradition, that absolutely the Torah was alluding to. Now, we started off at the very beginning, our very first class, in fact, wondering why doesn't the Torah focus more on this topic? Why doesn't the Torah just dwell on the topic of the messianic redemption of the world, the end of days, and the final perfection of existence as it is meant to be? And we discussed that while that is an important concept in Judaism and one that should not be undervalued, it is not the dominant value or focus of Judaism, which is indeed the perfection of the individual in whichever time they happen to live, whether it be in the worst of circumstances or whether it be during that time of full redemption. Therefore, the Torah does not focus on that point and feels little need to make much reference to it at all. The prophets, on the other hand, who were dealing with a very different set of circumstances and were not in themselves commanding the same way the Torah was commanding the particulars of our mitzvot, of our commandments, they had much more room and much more need for their generations to speak more passionately about these topics. This is an explanation of that discrepancy that others have commented on, others outside of the classic tradition. All right, hopefully that all made sense. Rambam has so far given us his thumbnail survey of what the Messianic era will be like, and he has also given us proof that this is a concept that is rooted within the Torah, even if much of the detail that is easily accessible to the rest of us is found more in the later prophetic works. All right, now, having given that sort of overview, now he wants to get down to brass tacks. That is to say, he wants to unpack what exactly this will look like in more detail. So let's follow his logic. One should not presume that the Messianic king must work miracles and wonders, bring about new phenomena in the world, resurrect the dead, or perform other similar deeds. This is definitely not true. And indeed, the rabbinic sections that we read from the Talmud were 95% free of any kind of hinting towards this type of miraculous behavior. There were a few things about, heaven shining down and that kind of thing, but by and large, the rabbis seem to be very coherent and unanimous in the opinion that that was not what we were looking for when it came to a sign of a messianic arrival. And Rambam is reiterating that, and he's doing so in a way that is beyond misunderstanding, just making this very transparent that from his point of view, which is definitely the majority point of view, the Messiah is not coming to work miracles. He is not coming in a way that will bring back the dead by a hand wave or anything like that. We'll go back into this topic a little bit further on, so we'll leave it there. But I want to look at the proof that he is about to bring that this is indeed what we would expect. Or not expect, I guess, would be a better way to phrase it. Proof can be brought from the fact that Rabbi Akiva one of the greater sages of the Mishnah. Greater doesn't mean that he was necessarily the super best and everybody loves him most, but he is one of the most important, one of the most widely cited, and one of the ones who had a large impact on the development of Jewish law and Jewish thinking. So, Rabbi Akiva was one of the supporters of King Bar Koziba, or Bar Kokhba, depending upon which way you wish to render his name. And we'll talk about Bar Kokhba in much more detail, next session. Depends on if we can finish all of Rambam today. That would become next week. If we can't finish all of Rambam today, then it'll be 2 weeks from now. But Bar Kokhba, Rabbi Akiva was a supporter of Bar Kokhba and would describe Bar Kokhba as the Messianic king. All right, so that's telling us something then about what Rabbi Akiva expected to see the Messiah do. He and all the sages of his generation, we will get to that when we look at Bar Kokhba in more detail, but he and, let's say, many of the sages of his generation considered Bar Kokhba to be the Messianic king until he was killed because of sins. And again, we're going to look at Bar Kokhba's story in much more detail, so I'm not going to go into it at all here, other than point out what Rambam is trying to say by extrapolation, what his proof is from this, which is, once he was killed, they realized he was not the Mashiach. The sages did not ask him for any signs or wonders. They didn't give him a proof test. They didn't say, if you're really the Messiah, go bring back Bob from the dead. Or if you're really a Messiah, let's see you split the river. They didn't ask for any of that. They considered that he had met the criteria, which we will look at, and that was sufficient for them to throw their weight behind him as a potential messianic king. When he died, however, then it became incontrovertible that he was not Mashiach. Because if there is one thing that all the opinions in Jewish tradition, up until a certain point, but really that was very, very recent that we got one splinter group on this point, but all the way up until the 20th century, let's say, all the Jewish opinions were very, very agreed. Once somebody died without having completed the tasks of the Messiah, they were no longer eligible to be considered as the Messiah. That to be Messiah meant to succeed in all of the messianic tasks. And death before success meant that you were not the Messiah. And we'll come back to what you might have been and how we handle the in-between cases. But that is what Rambam is saying here, is that no one asked Bar Kokhba for proof that he was the Messiah by having him perform miracles. Instead, they supported him for other reasons, which we'll get to. And when he died, they rejected that he was the Messiah and said, oh, well, I mean, we thought he might have been, but I guess he wasn't. And that was okay. Again, a lot more to say about Bar Kokhba and this first real test case of a Messiah during the Rabbinic age. But the main thrust of the matter is, says Rambam, this Torah, its statutes and its laws are everlasting. We may not add to them or detract from them. That when the Messiah comes, that is going to be his job. His job is going to be around the Torah, not around miracles. There might be miracles, might not. You'll notice that Rambam was very careful in his wording, as he is in every section of his work, that he does not have to work miracles. They might. The Mashiach might perform miracles, but that is not the measure of the messianic credibility. And somebody who does appear to perform miracles doesn't automatically get support as Messiah just because they did X, Y, and Z. Instead, as we're going to see, it's got to be about the Torah itself, about how they are living and what they are promoting, not about the show that they are putting on. Okay, so what is it that we look for when somebody is maybe going to be considered the Mashiach? Because Rambam is making it very clear for us, something that was a little bit more, what's the right word, held at a distance in the Talmudic discussion, that there will not be a shining arrow over the top of the head of Mashiach. There will not be a glow in the manger, if you'll pardon the reference. Instead, we're going to have to figure out who is the Messiah the hard way, which is by thinking and discussing and trying to examine the circumstances. So what rubric will we use to analyze a potential candidate to then understand whether he is the Messiah or might be the Messiah, or how we should consider who they are and what they are doing? All right, so here's what we got. If a king will arise from the house of David, who diligently contemplates the Torah and observes its mitzvot, as prescribed by the written and oral law, as David his ancestor, and will compel all of Israel to walk in the way of Torah, and rectify the breaches in his observance, and fight the wars of God, we may with assurance consider him Mashiach. Right, so what are the criteria? Well, there's really sort of three main things. One, he himself has to, I guess four, sorry. He himself has to come from the house of David. All right, that's not so complicated, but he also needs to be somebody that is well versed in Jewish law. He has to understand the Torah as well as the written and oral law, and that is really, really important because this is what makes him a rabbinic candidate. Obviously, there are others who have come along, and we'll talk about one in the next main paragraph, that rejected much of the oral law in particular, and thus is ineligible according to our understanding of who the Messiah will be. So this is his foundation, and he does so in a way that will be similar to David, which means he doesn't have to be perfect, as David was not perfect, but he is trying to do what is right in his life. Three, sorry, lost count there. He also has to be behaving in a way that he is, as king, he is bringing the nation towards Torah, that he is helping to fix the mistakes that we are making in our observance of Torah or in the conduct of our society. So he is not only a righteous king in and of himself, but he is also one that is bringing the nation in that direction too. And then he has to also be fighting the wars of God. Now, we don't get exactly what that looks like, but we know from our Talmudic discussion that the rabbis anticipated that at least one of the major interpretations of the Messianic era was that unless other things had changed, we were going to end up having to struggle against those nations that were committed to evil, to wrong, to ways of conducting the world that are unjust, that are hateful, that are oppressive, basically the people who enjoy status because they have perverted the ways of goodness and rightness, and they will probably fight tooth and nail because people in power tend to not want to give up power, even if the power they have is based in corruption. So if you have somebody fighting in those circumstances, and they have reestablished their sovereignty, and they have proven themselves individually righteous, and they are helping the nation move towards righteous, then we can consider him Mashiach. Now, consider here is a tricky word in English. Basically, it means they are a candidate for being the Messiah, and indeed, we can treat him as such. You'll notice treating him as such doesn't mean we give him carte blanche. He still needs to follow the Torah. He still needs to behave in a righteous manner. He still needs to be doing what is right. It's not like once you crown somebody Mashiach, then all supervision or checks and balances are thrown out the window. We don't do that. So he now is considered somebody that we should support as Mashiach because we have seen him engage in this type of behavior. Then, if he succeeds in the above, meaning he actually wins the wars, and he does bring the people back to the proper way of living, and he is living a good and righteous life, and he also builds the temple in its place and gathers the dispersed of Israel, then, okay, now we are actually having a definite Mashiach. Then he is definitely the Messiah. You will note no one has fulfilled that criteria yet, which is why from all the candidates that we'll examine over the coming weeks, we know none of them were actually the Messiah. We'll talk a little bit more when we get into it about what we mean by false Messiah. False Messiah, like the word lie, usually means intentionality. but sometimes it would be perhaps more generous to say failed Messiah, potential, but in the end, not noted, not real Messiah, because not all of them were faking it. Some of them, probably Bar Kokhba, really believed that he was a legitimate candidate and was doing the right thing. We're going to look at him in more detail to see that that wasn't always the right way to look at him, but at least it didn't feel like he was doing this in a deceptive manner. Others that we'll see later, absolutely, this was a con man system, and they knew that they weren't the Messiah, but that didn't stop them from grabbing that title and wrapping themselves in the mantle. Here, Rambam is giving us the final criteria. If somebody says they're from the house of David and they are righteous for themselves, but they are not helping bring others to the way of God, then they are not the Messiah. If somebody is versed in Torah, but they don't fight the wars of God, they're not the Messiah. If they do all of that but lose, so they unite all the people together and we are fighting against our enemies and we lose that war, they weren't the Messiah either. Even if they did everything in the first paragraph on the screen right now, if they lose, then they're not the Messiah. And even if they win, but they fail to build the temple or fail to gather the dispersed of the people of Israel, they are not Mashiach. Okay, we'll come back to who they actually are in just another line or two, so hold on for that. So what happens after he has done those things, and now we can say we are definitely sure this is Mashiach. Notice, even if he did the whole first paragraph, we would say he is probably the Messiah, but we wouldn't say he's definitely. Once he's done these other things, he will then improve the entire world, motivating all nations to serve God together. As Zephaniah states, I will transform the peoples to a purer language, that they all will call upon the name of God and serve him with one purpose. So that's the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is that all of us will come together and have peace and have a proper way of living for everyone in the world. As other references and other texts have made it clear, this does not mean everybody becomes Jewish. Serving God is not only accomplished through the path of Judaism. For Jews, that is the path that we use to serve God, and the only one that is right for us. For others that are not Jewish, well, some certainly can convert to Judaism, but the vast majority would stay non-Jewish, but would find ways within their own traditions and cultures to serve God that would be harmonious with what God wants, which is a good and right way of living, and a way that is peaceful and beautiful for all. And that is the ultimate accomplishment of Mashiach. And well, we're still waiting, and you can see now why we wait. It's not just because we want someone who will create a sovereign state. It's not just because we want somebody who can help teach us Judaism for ourselves. It's because we want this to be a global transformation that allows the entire world to live in peace. Now, coming back to our question, where did my mouse go? There we go. If he did not succeed to this degree, okay, he did a lot, but he didn't do all, or he was killed. He surely is not the Redeemer promised by the Torah. Rather, if he failed or he died before he could succeed, he should be considered as all the other proper and complete kings of the Davidic dynasty who died. Look, Josiah was mostly a good king, and then he died. He wasn't the Messiah, not capital T Messiah. Other people have done good things, but failed at other parts, and from the Davidic dynasty, and they're not considered the Messiah. Instead, they are proper and, authorized kings. God caused him to arise only to test the many, as Daniel 11 states. And some of the wise men will stumble, to try them, to refine, and to clarify until the appointed time, because the set time is in the future. Rambam is drawing our attention to the fact that in the prophet, in the words of Daniel, not technically a prophet, there will be false starts. There will be opportunities that people will get behind someone and consider them to be Mashiach. And it is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, if they are doing much of what we listed, they should be supported in their endeavors. After all, they are doing positive and good things. And again, that'll come back when we're talking about Bar Kokhba in our next segment. But on the other hand, people have a tendency, let's say tendency, that's the right word, to not just fall in line behind someone doing the right thing, but to become slavish in their devotion to that person or slavish in their belief that they couldn't have been mistaken about that person's true status. And unfortunately, there are many who will support good people throughout our history that refuse to acknowledge that they were wrong when they thought the person was the Messiah. You'll note that, let's scroll back up so we can get this all on one screen. You'll note that it's perfectly fine to say, I think this guy is the Messiah, while they're doing everything in that first paragraph. They are a king, they are serving as king, they are from David, they are doing the Torah in all of its details, they are helping others to return to Torah, and they are fighting on behalf of God against those that try to destroy the path of good. Nothing wrong with saying, I think this guy is the Messiah. But when they fail, either because they themselves are killed or they themselves pervert their work, because sometimes things go bad, we need to be prepared to say, nope, guess he wasn't. He was a good candidate for a while, or he did X, Y, and Z, but not, ABC. We need to be able to constantly update our support for someone based upon what is actually happening. And we will see as we review our own history of different messianic figures that it is adhering to someone after they are dead or after they have ruined their candidacy by their behavior that gets us into the most trouble. That if we maintain our ability to simply say, you know what? Now they've stepped out of line, or now they've failed, or now they're dead. I guess they were not the Messiah and never were. If we maintain that ability, that flexibility, that humility, we're in a much better place. And that also does allow us to both hope as well as be cautious, cautiously optimistic, I guess might be the right balance of attitude that we should approach this with. All right. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at a example of someone that was considered to be a Messiah, indeed is still considered to be the Messiah by the Christians, but Judaism does not consider to be the Messiah. Now, I will point out that some of the passages that we are going to read are the reason why the Catholic Church banned certain paragraphs from being included in copies of Rambam's Mishneh Torah, because they are not flattering to the figure of Jesus or Christianity. And now, I'm not saying that Rambam is wrong for being insulting to Christianity. He lived at a time when he and many of his co-religionists had been hounded and persecuted by Christians, as well as Muslims in other times and places as well, sometimes simultaneously. And so it's not surprising that he is going to have a less than flattering view of Christianity or Islam, which is coming up as well. Understand, though, that this is not some great evil. I know for people that are part of a dominant religious culture, if you are Christian or Muslim and watching this and you are used to being part of a dominant culture, you may be outraged that someone could ever say anything insulting about your particular beliefs or things that you hold as true and precious. But you do the same to us every single day. So, have a little bit of perspective outside of your privileged position that we as Jews have lived for the last 2,000 years with no one in power ever saying that what we did was worthy of consideration. And we have been overtly persecuted and suffered greatly for holding on to our beliefs. And we were never surprised that people who disagreed with us. So please, have a measure of humility, see what our disagreements were, especially during this time 1,000 years ago, when things were especially not bad, or especially not good, of why we might have this opinion. This does not mean that Jews hate Christians or Muslims, but we do have sharp disagreements with the theology of Christianity and Islam. If we didn't, we'd all be the same religion. Okay. Jesus of Nazareth, who aspired to be Mashiach and was executed by the court, was also alluded to in Daniel's prophecies. This is from chapter 11. And the reference that's being used here obliquely is the vulgar among your people shall exalt themselves in an attempt to fulfill the vision, but they shall stumble. All right, now, you may not like the idea of Jesus being portrayed as vulgar. If you want, we can simply say that those who came after Jesus portrayed him in a way that makes them vulgar because they deliberately distorted what he was trying to do and tried to create this false impression that he was Mashiach. It is a little unclear of exactly what Jesus believed about himself, but certainly later Christian authors within the Christian Bible did believe him to be the Messiah, and they did write in passages that were clearly intended to fulfill the vision. That is to say, they deliberately went out of their way to find a genealogical connection between Jesus and King David, although much of that is spurious. And they did write other passages to show that they thought he was fulfilling earlier prophecy. And the idea in Rambam here is that Daniel warned us that there are going to be people who are going to try and do this. And that is very understandable, even if we don't apply this directly to Jesus or Christianity. Once the prophecies have been made, how could we not but expect some people, charlatans, to try to present themselves as fulfilling those prophecies? If it says he's going to ride a donkey, all it takes to make people think you're the Messiah then is to buy a donkey. That doesn't mean that you are the Messiah. It just means you've read the book and you know how you're supposed to act. That's not the same thing as being the actual Messiah. It's not about fulfilling the prophecy through the choreography or fulfilling the prophecy through the costuming or the staging. It is about fulfilling the prophecy through, as Rambam said previously on our previous page, actually performing the commandments, gathering the people, doing what is right, wielding sovereignty as king. This is what is essential. And even if you do all the other things and have all the trappings that are talked about in other visions and prophecies, if you don't do that, you're not the Messiah. And unfortunately, many people, and this includes many, many incidents beyond Christianity itself, will fall for the staging and miss the actual important task that the Messiah is meant to be accomplishing. And this is why Rambam states, can there be a greater stumbling block than Christianity? All the prophets spoke as the Mashiach, of the Mashiach as the Redeemer of Israel and their Savior, who would gather their dispersed and strengthen their observance of the mitzvot. In contrast, Christianity caused the Jews to be slain by the sword, their remnants to be scattered and humbled, the Torah to be altered, and the majority of the world to err and serve a God other than the Lord. So he is sharp in his criticism that Christianity did not come to fulfill Torah, it altered it. It literally created a new Bible, which rejects in large portion, a vast majority of the commandments, which the Messiah was supposed to be helping us to fulfill. You can't really call that the fulfillment. And indeed, in Jewish parlance, that is putting a stumbling block before the blind. It is a trap that led many people astray from what God actually wanted. And of course, if we measure the Messiah's success by bringing peace to the Jewish people, which is sort of job one, as mentioned in the prophecies, well, Christianity has been responsible for the death of our people for 2,000 years through various forms of state-sponsored terrorism, war, torture, expulsion, starvation, deprivation, and just, I mean, the list goes on and on. Not exactly what it seems like God was prophesying, and therefore not really fulfilling the prophecies that are mentioned throughout the Bible. Nevertheless, this is a very interesting take from Rambam. Nevertheless, The intent of the creator of the world is not within the power of man to comprehend, for his ways are not our ways, nor are his thoughts our thoughts. So this is Rambam saying, look, it's kind of crazy that Christianity has spread and convinced so many people of what we believe to be something not heading in the right direction. But we got to understand, why did God do this? I don't know, right? God must have his reasons, but we cannot unpack all of them. However, he does give us a hypothesis of why God allowed the Christian faith and the Muslim faith to grow the way it did, despite the persecution and problems that both of them have created for the Jews. Ultimately, all the deeds of Jesus of Nazareth and the Ishmaelite who arose after him, that's referring to Muhammad, will only serve to prepare the way for Mashiach's coming and the improvement of the entire world, meaning that they are plowing the ground. They may be doing it badly, they may be doing it wrong, they may be making many errors, but they are preparing the way. How so? Motivating the nations to serve God together. As Zephaniah states, I will transform the peoples to a pure language, that they will all call upon the name of God and serve him with one purpose. So Rambam is arguing that both Jesus as well as Muhammad may not be instructing people in what we believe to be the right truth of how to serve God, but they are nonetheless making a difference in making it easier for the Messiah, when he does arrive, to achieve the goals that are his goals. How will this come about? The entire world has already become filled with mention of Mashiach, Torah, and mitzvot. These matters have been spread to the furthermost islands, to many stubborn-hearted nations. They discuss these matters and the mitzvot of the Torah, saying these mitzvot were true, but were already negated in the present age and are not applicable for our time. Or others say, implied in the mitzvot are hidden concepts that cannot be understood simply. The Mashiach has already come, their version, and revealed those hidden truths. So basically, Rambam is saying, people are talking about God and referring to the one God that we believe in. They may use different terms. They may call him God. They may call him the Father in Christian Trinity type talk. They may call him Allah, which is the Arabic word simply for El, which is the Hebrew word for God as a title rather than God's personal name. But they are talking about God. They are talking about the Bible. They are talking about commandments. They are talking about the right issues. They are raising the right questions. They may be providing the wrong answers from the Jewish point of view, but they have gotten the word much more broadly spread than would have happened had they not been there. Therefore, in the conclusion of chapter 11, when the true Messianic king will arise and prove successful, doing everything we saw before, his position becoming exalted and uplifted, they will all return and realize that their ancestors endowed them with a false heritage, and their prophets and ancestors caused them to err. So, from a Jewish point of view, at some point when the Messiah has been fully revealed, they'll realize, because they were given the tools to understand the basic topics, that they've made a mistake, that there were errors that had crept into their cultures through these other theologies that have led them in the wrong direction on at least many points. But the Messiah will make them realize that there is the right way to live, and they will be much closer to it, having been raised with the ideas of Christianity and Islam. Now, I know this is not exactly the most ecumenical of messages, and Rambam certainly wasn't trying to participate in an interfaith gathering with this message. But I'd like you for a moment, and we'll close off with these ideas, and we'll save chapter 12 for next week. I'd like you for a moment to understand that this is an incredibly generous read for Rambam to make. Living at a time of the Crusades, living at a time of persecution and expulsion by both Christian leaders as well as Muslim leaders, living at a time when Jews were forced to be official second-class citizens in pretty much every country we lived in, and knowing that our fortunes, our lives hung by a thread of whatever the local ruler or sometimes mob was feeling at any given day, to say that there is useful and meaningful value in what Christianity and Islam is doing is incredibly generous and incredibly perceptive. That in order for the Messiah to be able to accomplish his job most easily, well, the world needs to already be prepared to understand these concepts. And while in the 21st century, most of us take it as a given that everybody knows about the idea of a single God, of monotheism, that everybody knows about the idea that there is a binding ethical morality that is universal. Everybody knows about the idea that as an individual, we have a soul that is being shaped by the actions we choose. Those concepts were not there 1,000, 2,000 years ago in every part of the world. That those concepts were there perhaps in a seed form, but they had not been fully realized or fully sprouted. And Christianity and Islam, not to excuse all of their crimes, both against us as well as against many other people around the world, did at the very least help those ideas take firmer root. Now, they were distorted, they were warped, they were changed in ways that allowed them to continue to behave in horrible ways and to persecute and cause great suffering in the name of their faiths in many corners of the world, pretty much all of them. But at least the language they used can prove useful. In a similar way, we can look at the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is a beautifully constructed document that was written by a slaveholder and it was implemented by a nation which refused to extend all of the lofty ideals in the Declaration of Independence to all races, to all religions, and to all genders. That doesn't mean the Declaration of Independence wasn't useful, though, because it did at least put a marker on the table that these were the ideals. And over time, we in the US have looked at that document again and again, and then looked at our society and said, you know what? It's falling short. It says, you know, these truths are self-evident. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And yet we see government policy and societal norms that are preventing that. That women don't have freedom, that people of color don't have freedom, that people of different religions don't have freedom. And we think the truths espoused in this document are right, even if the way they've been implemented are wrong. And much of the history of the US has been living up to those truths, even when reality was failing to do so. So too, from a Jewish point of view, there are truths that are being spread through Christianity and Islam that are worthwhile and meaningful and to some measure beneficial even in the short term. But in the long term, they will have already prepared people to receive the message of Mashiach and already begin to digest it without having to be introduced to these concepts from scratch. So there's a lot more to be said about everything we ever study, but especially this. And I know these types of words can make people very anxious and very upset. This is not trying to say that Christians or Muslims are bad people. It is saying that from a Jewish point of view, there are mistakes within their theologies. But nonetheless, we respect the right of them to live as they wish, to act as they wish, provided it is not unjust or immoral. And in the long run, we know that we'll all see each other as brothers and sisters, and we'll all recognize the right path to serve God in a way that is good for all of us. I'll leave you on that note of hope and optimism, and we'll pick up with chapter 12 next time. Take care, everyone, and be well.